Well, time now for our political panel, and joining us, member for Hasluck, Labor MP Tanya Lawrence is here, and member for Menzies, Liberal MP Keith Wallahan too. Welcome to both of you. Now, obviously, it goes without saying you're not involved in Senate estimates, but PWC is a running issue, isn't it, Tanya? To you, first of all, does it seem unseemly that communications internally, say from the Finance Department to departments like Defence, didn't come out sooner? The penny dropped that a large number of partners had knowledge of all of this?
Thank you, Greg, for the opportunity to come on today, and hi also to you, Keith. Look, obviously it's deeply disturbing what's coming through the Senate estimates in relation to PWC, and for sure I think there is a need for a major review to understand why red flags weren't identified earlier. Like, this has been going for some years, obviously. So I do believe that the process the Senate's are going through at the moment is clearly quite robust, but there is clearly a need to do a lot more as well.
Once bitten, twice shy. Would you agree, Keith? It looks like governments, or this government, no matter who was elected, but this current government is going to be very wary in process dealing with the likes of PWC into the future. Have they deserved that?
Well, I think so. Australians are outraged at what they've heard. Some issues stay within the bubble of Canberra, but this is one that people in mainstream Australia are talking about, and they're really disturbed that greed was put before the national interest. I think we have to be careful, though, we don't just focus on PWC, because often there's a tendency to fight the last war, and the next scandal or the next issue might be a company that we don't know about. So I'd imagine PWC is heightened to this risk, but we should make sure that there isn't issues across other contractors.
But where would that leave governments, or particularly bureaucracies, I suppose, Tanya, in wanting to consult, wanting to work with industry? In this case, it happens to be the tax industry and the Treasury, getting them to sign non-disclosure agreements and then it's breached. It's not going to be easy to navigate your way through that in a balanced way that does consult but doesn't leave you in this mess.
I think it goes to the point why our government's taking this matter so seriously and appointing Patrick Gorman to now become the Minister for the Public Service to work through and basically ensure that the public service themselves are fully resourced to be able to undertake the work that's necessary for a functioning government. I think what we've seen over the years is a ballooning, some tens of billions, $21 billion of ballooning of outsourcing of work. Now, I understand for some highly technical matters it may be required to outsource to some specialty skilled areas, but in the main I think there's probably been just a trend of outsourcing. We need to restore the public service to what it was. As a former public servant myself, I'm deeply proud of what that institution brings to the government, and we need to ensure that they are resourced to be able to undertake the work that they need in terms of providing advice.
It does sound like that's going to be a natural consequence of all of this. Why don't we move on to the economy, because we heard from Stephen Kennedy, Keith, today on a few fronts in estimates, but one was the broad outlook as published in the budget. No particular problem with inflation, no real surprise there coming from the Treasury Secretary, but does that evidence somewhat spike the opposition's guns, since this was the primary argument run since the budget itself?
It does, because it's not whether the Treasury Secretary is concerned, it's whether Australians are concerned, and they really are. We saw that the Commonwealth Bank produced a list by age category of which parts of Australia were spending less than they were this time last year. And what struck me was that those under 50 have really pulled back their spending. For those aged between 25 to 29, it's fallen off a cliff, because they're trying to put food on the table, save for a house deposit, and just have ballooning bills. So it is a problem out in mainstream Australia.
That's all by design, though, isn't it? That's the whole point of ratcheting interest rates and tightening down on spending, as we saw in the budget.
Well, raising interest rates is a blunt instrument, and it does hurt people who have mortgages more than those who've paid off their house or don't have it. But even for those people who are renting, if the investors are paying more on their mortgage, that often gets passed down. So we are seeing younger Australians get hit harder, and I think we need to see more relief. And the best way for that to happen is that the government's not adding to the inflationary pressures, and we submit that they are.
All right. Well, on the wages front, which was another line of questioning put today, Tanya, to Stephen Kennedy, he seems reasonably sanguine about wages demands that are coming forward. I refer to an article by Phil Curry in the Financial Review that suggests you might have had interactions with Philip Lowe last week. Does he come from the same perspective as the Treasury Secretary on the specific question of wages?
I'm not commenting on the matters that were discussed in a private committee meeting. I think it's disturbing, and again, that there's been an integrity breach of a government committee. However, on the matter of what the Secretary spoke to, I think it is a good signal that providing real wage rises for low-income earners is not a contributor to inflation, and I think it's just another factor that to ensure that people can meet their cost of living expenses together with the relief that the government is providing in terms of childcare relief, cheaper medicines, making bulk billing more accessible and available to people as well.
Yes, Stephen Kennedy definitely said that in relation to the minimum wage case. He said those numbers are tightly defined, and so you can kind of afford in the economy to have them get a higher wage increase. Is it as clear, though, on your understanding and on the evidence for everyone else on awards above that if wage demands continue in 4s, 5s or 6%?
I think each sector will undertake its own assessment. So this enterprise bargaining will enable that. I understand the public service is also currently going through a review at the federal level. So each one will be assessed on its merits. But I think the main message is that for low-income age workers, an increase in their minimum wage is not a contributor, and we need to stop demonising to suggest that it is.
All right, and Keith, I guess we'll hear from Philip Lowe himself before too long about his own view on wages. From what you see of private sector demands, public sector demands, even if you want to leave the minimum wage case off to one side, do you think there is wages pressure behind an inflation build-up? If not in the past, then prospectively.
First of all, I agree with Tanya. We'll wait to see what the Governor says in a public hearing tomorrow. I think private hearings should stay private.
Sure.
But in terms of the actual issue, I mean, we can comment on that. A lot of people in this building talk about wage increases. The thing that matters is real wage increases, which isn't just if you earn an extra $10 a week but you're spending an extra $100. It's actually how much disposable income you have left. And we want to see real wage increases. And the economists say that if you're going to have those increases, it's best that there's some sort of productivity increase that offsets it to stop it being inflationary. And I think that can happen in multiple different ways, including technology.
Hasn't been happening though, has it?
It hasn't, and both sides, haven't covered themselves in glory for productivity for the last 15 or so years. I think we all need to turn our mind to improving productivity. And again, not talking out of school for the Economics Committee, we're both on it. We're both trying to turn our mind to how we can get productivity moving in Australia again.
I understand the sensitivity around that. Last one on it, though, Tanya, on the productivity question, I think that is a given, whether you're the Treasury Secretary or any other boffin operating in this area. What is it that triggers the necessary productivity growth to justify wages, even as inflation comes under control?
Look, I think there's a number of potential contributing ideas. Technology is one of them. I think as we see companies making record profits, it's time to reinvest that back into the business, back into industry, to be able to work out ways of creating more efficiencies. Ultimately, there's only so much you or I or anyone, be it laying bricks, whatever else, can actually do within a given hour. So we need to look at other forms of innovation, and thankfully, with commitments like the National Reconstruction Fund, that's our way of generating great innovation within Australia to be able to identify ways to improve productivity.
All right, well, you'll all get to pursue some of these matters further as you do in your committee work. Why don't we move on to The Voice, because debate is wrapping up on the Constitution Alteration Bill. I might put this one to you first, Keith. The Coalition is, the Liberal Party, I should say, is committed to supporting this without amendment. Do you personally commit to that? Will you be voting for the passage of that bill?
I will be voting for the bill because I recognise that there is a mandate to put this question to the Australian people, but the mandate for the answer lies with the people. So it's up to them to decide where this goes. And whatever decision they decide the day after the referendum, we all have to accept that that decision is the right one. That's what happens in a democracy.
So your race is run now. We are all very familiar with the arguments that you put up around wording, but that's run and done. It's onward. Speaking just personally, as an MP, it's onward towards the referendum with a date being named. And what will you do in the context of that campaign?
It's a good question. I put a lot of work and time into that committee. We tried to put, constructive options forward for the government to amend it. They chose not to do it. That's their prerogative. But the campaign will run, and I think my personal commitment is to respect the decision of Australians. I have a personal view. I think the wording is risky, so I won't be voting for it. But I get one vote, the same as everyone in my electorate, and that's the way it should be.
Are you prepared to declare what that vote will be? I know it's a secret ballot.
I will.
So
on the wording that will now go forward, I don't support that wording. I don't support that wording.
So as a private citizen with your pencil in October or November, you will be voting no?
I will be voting no on this wording, but I also commit to respecting all of the views in my electorate. And for those who vote yes, no, or those who aren't sure, I will provide information for them, but I won't be standing there, waving my view in their face. That's for them to make their own decision.
All right, not excluding you from that, but I did want to try and pin Keith down. Tanya, from the passage, though, in your case through the House, but then eventually through the Senate, what lies ahead? What are you going to be doing in Hasluck to advance this?
Well, in my electorate, I have one of the larger peri-urban populations of Indigenous people. I'm just shy of 6,000, which is about 3.3%. I think for your seat, Keith, it's about 0.3%, just for contrast.
Well done.
And so there's a lot of people who are very, very clear in mind to say this is what they want. We talk about, democracy, having equality in terms of freedom of religion, freedom of assembly and so on. This is our chance for a democratic political equality. And this is what Indigenous First Nations people are saying is the way of achieving that, and to provide that voice, that recognition of the Constitution, but a voice to Parliament to finally provide them with that democratic political equality, and I'm excited to back them in.
Is that an overwhelmingly clear majority in either Western Australia or your part of Western Australia? The reason I ask is we had Senator Linda Reynolds, on the program yesterday, who reported having travelled through the Kimberley, and she thought communities there were far more ambivalent, if not even opposed to a national voice. You don't pick up any of that? I
think early on there was a lot of confusing messages and unfortunate messages coming out from the Leader of the Opposition, very trying to do scaremongering. It's without doubt that I've had some Noongar Whadjuk people speak to me about the amping up of the feeling of racism towards them as a consequence of people being fearful of Australia date being changed or other nonsense, that this is not, when it's not about this at all. And I just, I guess it's a message that it's okay if you want to make a debate about different reasoning, but to do it on fact and not on scaremongering, which is unfortunately some of the confusing messages that have landed. However, I think now the campaign will start to ramp up. The civic education has been launched, and I think we'll see a shift. Certainly, it has happened in my electorate, where people are now, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, are getting behind it.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess there is momentum still to build in both campaigns, really. But on mechanics, I think you're probably strong on this, Keith, the knowledge around how the No campaign will be constituted for the preparation of the pamphlet, since the vast majority of both chambers will be voting for the Constitution Alteration Bill. Do you understand that Liberal colleagues in both chambers will vote no in order to get themselves impanelled on that No pamphlet campaign exercise?
That's right. So the Nationals have declared that they all will vote no, and there might be an exception or two, but I think they'll all vote no. There will be some Liberals that will vote no in the Senate and the House, and then that gives them authority and right to be in that committee.
Do you think they do that, by the way, out of conviction because they want to vote no, or are they doing it to facilitate the preparation of an accurate pamphlet?
I'm not sure who they all are, but the few that I've spoken to who will, it's out of conviction. So they have a strongly held view and they'd like to have a say in what the wording is in the pamphlet. And I think that's an important civic education task. But we want that pamphlet to be as clear as it can be for both sides, because it'll go in every letterbox before the referendum.
Whether anyone reads them or not is another
right.
question. I think the Parliament has already examined that, but we'll see. Tanya Lawrence, thanks so much for joining us today.
Greg.
To Keith Wallahan, great to have both of you here to cover that ground with us.